Here are the facts first. I spent a short weekend in Bucharest because after I had driven through the country years before this trip, I still felt that I owe it to the travel god that I explore a city which I have never been to. I wasn't sure how many things I'd be able to see during the short period of time I given myself, but here are all the things I've seen. One note before we start. It's a common complaint among Hungarians and, well, maybe Romanians, but I don't know, is that people from other countries often mix these two cities and mistake Bucharest for Budapest and the other way around. And some very sensitive Hungarians might have a problem when some people say that the capital city of Hungary is Bucharest. But personally, I do understand the confusion, especially in English. I often struggle to say the right city because they are so close in pronunciation. Maybe it's a problem of the English language, who knows? But let's move on. Bucharest is the city of contrast. At least that's what I realized. Some parts of the city are extremely new and very well designed, and other parts are old and a little bit on the crumbly side. While I never really encountered any sort of dangerous alleys while I was trying to walk around the city, the buildings themselves do have a kind of dangerously old vibe. Later on, I'm gonna complain a lot about the weather because it was raining the whole time while I was there, but due to that or just my general love for food, this whole trip was, well, mostly about food. A friend of mine who lives in Romania often talks about all sorts of food that they eat, and frankly I was kind of curious what Bucharest can offer when it comes to food, since there was very little else that I could do. Because it was raining, and I mean raining heavily throughout the whole trip, from the moment I stepped out of the airplane until the moment I stepped in again. That sort of heavy rain is more or less unheard of in Hungary or even in the UK. It does rain quite a lot sometimes, but it's always mostly sort of a light rain as opposed to something insanely heavy that creates floods and all that. Well, let me start with my favorite airport. When I went to Russia, I did not use my favorite airport because, well, I did make a mistake and I did explain that. But here, this time, I could use my favorite airport, which is closest to me, that's Luton. And over the years, they have developed it quite a lot. And it's more or less the home base, when it comes to the UK, of the airline Wizz Air, which I use all the time to get from the UK to home for a weekend or for a week or something. It's a very cheap airline, but you have to pay for every tiny single thing. If you want your luggage checked in, yeah, you have to pay for it. If you want priority boarding, which is sort of the equivalent of business class, but with the same seats, you just board a plane before anyone else, you have to pay for it. And most of the time, I'm quite grateful for that price drop that is caused by this kind of system, since often I only need a backpack, which is way below the 8 kilograms they permit, and off I go. So flying with Wizz Air is always fun, except when not, because sometimes they are late, and sometimes they are just horrible. But what else would you expect when you pay almost nothing? So instead of a complaint, let me turn this into a compliment, because Wizz Air is the kind of airline company that goes for the lowest price possible, and they do achieve that, very much so. Now, I noticed when I started traveling that every country is different. There is no two countries that are the same. Road signs are slightly different. Hotels, the way you pay things, whether you receive an invoice, a bill, a receipt or whatever. And I know for a fact that in Hungary, more often than not, you do not receive a receipt. So I was not surprised when eventually I did not receive a receipt from the hotel or room or apartment owner when I paid. But here is a funny story. Well, it might be funny, might not be. It was very dark when I arrived and I walked to the hotel, which was near the airport. But I did not really read the instructions carefully that said you're supposed to call ahead, which was kind of weird. So I did read that on my way and realized that, okay, but I was already there. So I thought. And it was kind of a normal detached house looking thing, so I walked in. But as luck would have it, while I was at the right address, that was not the house I was looking for. Instead, I walked into a party. And I would love to say that I was able to stay and party all night, but then I really need my sleep. So everybody was very, very nice, and they instructed me that probably I need to turn left at the corner and find that other place. And then on my way to the new place, I teamed up with 2 other tourists or travelers that were looking for the same place. And in the end, we managed to call the owner, who came in about 5 minutes, and everybody was happy and all the things were fine, except I did have to pay in cash because there was no receipt. But I already saw the place, which was quite fabulous. It was a proper apartment that is out there for the taking, I suppose. Very cheap, very affordable, but you have to pay in cash. So I spent a lovely night at the hotel apartment thingy, which was a modern building which was in a modern building complex. And I thought to myself, okay, well, this has been an adventure so far. Let's see what tomorrow brings, because probably the rain will stop and I can explore the city. But that's not what happened. The rain didn't stop at all. So I was left in the rain, walking to the bus stop to get into the city, and when I got to the city centre, the rain continued. So I thought to myself, okay, well, I'm not hungry at the moment. Let's find a museum, because that probably has a roof. And I did manage to find a museum. Not just any museum, the National History Museum, which featured an exhibit on the First World War and explained how Romania participated. And that was very interesting because I learned a lot about the other side of the war. I mean, I'm sure that it comes as not a surprise when I say that every country teaches history in a slightly different way. And it's always massively interesting to see what those countries teach about their own history and their place in the grand scheme of things. So that was a very interesting exhibition where they talked about how much territory Romania lost and then participated in the First World War to gain some territory and all that. Everywhere I go, I seem to find some cow-related artifacts. Not just in Russia or in the UK, where there are concrete cows near to where I live, but cows in history. And while it's probably not interesting to anyone else, I just did want to point it out. And then, eventually, I did have to move on, and the rain didn't seem to stop. So I was left with walking in the rain to find a restaurant, probably because I got a little bit hungry. And here, despite the rain, I was able to see what the city can offer during the day when it comes to houses, streets and cars and all that. For instance, the apartment I stayed in the night before was modern, new, very well built, but everywhere I walked I encountered this duality of things that are new and very well built and things that are old and, again, a little bit on the crumbly side. I did read a lot about Bucharest as one of the fastest growing city in the world, or at least in Europe, and I can confirm that that seems to be the case. It's true. It's really something. It's really a city that is going through this heavy transitioning from old to new. Now at this point I have to admit, simply just must admit, that it's been several months since I've been to Romania, and I can only remember half of my thoughts that I had back then. And please don't treat this video as something definitive about Romania. So that's why, instead of going on and on and on about how this transition period is taking place and what the reasons are, or anything about the government culture or whatever, I have to say that I experience very little of it, and I blame the rain. Because most of the time I'm able to run around and experience loads of stuff, but even Romanians did not go out in this rain. So it was just buildings and I. So it was just the buildings and I trying to mingle. And they have pretty nice buildings, especially at night when all the historical pieces are lit up as customary, and it's fun to walk around in the darkness. Now it's time to talk about food, because besides the buildings, there was nothing more that I could properly enjoy, at least not things that I was able to think of. Mind you, I'm not the kind of person who would go into all the pubs and all the clubs. I like to stay outdoors. So I went to 2 restaurants that are right next to each other. I didn't know that at first, because that's not the reason I chose them. The first one was Saray, whatever it's properly pronounced. Please excuse me because I have no idea. That featured lots of fancy kebab-based food. That was quite tasty. So I stayed there for a while, indoors, out of the rain, but eventually I had to go out, run around again, and then I went back to the other restaurant, but I only realized it after I chose where I wanted to go. The other one was called Simbad, of the pronunciation of which I'm a bit more sure. I have to take a note that these restaurants both had quite good reviews. Most of them were 4 or 5 stars. Yet, when I was there, almost nobody visited these restaurants. Mind you, these are in the city center and probably for tourists. But there are no tourists when there is rain, I assume. At the second place, I ate some kebab-based food. And then I realized that everywhere I looked, there was kebab written all over the places. So I thought to myself, okay, well, I guess that word is very important when it comes to food in Romania. If I was a proper food consumer, I think I would be able to point out why historically kebab is prominent in Romanian cuisine, but all I can think of at the moment is that maybe it's from Turkey or something like that, but it could very well be a Romanian thing. Now, I have no idea about the demographics of my viewers, well, you, but if you're from Romania and would like to comment on the food of Romania, I would be more than happy to learn from you, because that's something I'm interested in. Food. Rain, not so much. Food, yes, definitely. And now back to the street. And I think my impression is that there are wide avenues and impressive buildings, and it's a very impressive city. Not to mention that Bucharest houses the biggest parliament building in history. So much, so big, that every single ministry along with the House of Parliament is in there, and they cannot fill out all the rooms available. At least that's what I read about it. But a parliament is one thing. It was not a surprise because I had already known that Romania is an Orthodox country. So in that sense, in my head, it's kind of similar. It has something in common with Russia, for instance, or Serbia. Now, I know, and this is very important to note, that I'm only saying this in the sense of the architecture, and it has nothing to do with the people living there. Because there is one thing you, as a viewer who might not be from the eastern part of Europe, have to understand that almost everybody hates them. Almost every country hates the other countries in Europe, in Eastern Europe. And of course we have all sorts of historical reasons why to do so. But there is one thing, one very important thing that I noticed throughout my traveling, is that ultimately people are people everywhere. So if you go to Romania, even as a Hungarian, nobody should expect that they they are treated differently as long as they behave themselves. Just don't go around trotting, shouting that Hungary is the best country in the world. Much like in the US, you can't just go around saying that Russia is the best country in the world or the other way around and stuff. You know, as long as you respect the culture, you can expect to be treated fairly, which I was, but that was no surprise. If you're a frequent flyer, then you are probably as bored as I am when it comes to flying. So after a weekend of fun in the rain, especially of the food, I had to fly home. But I was a little bit disappointed, not in the country or the city, but in the weather, because it did not let me fully enjoy the experience of Bucharest. So I guess one day I will have to return in better weather, but also because, as luck would have it, exactly while I visited Romania, there was a European Union, there was a NATO session in progress, and I was not able to visit the parliament and see it on the inside. So despite having wanted to pay my debt in a sort of twisted way and see Bucharest for myself, I'm afraid I will have to do it again in the future because this wasn't ideal. And since I didn't have a lot of places to walk around and my shoes were ruined because of the rain, I headed to the airport to have some food there. Since then, I made the smart step. I took the smart step and got myself waterproof shoes. But hey, you can learn from every single experience. And this is what I learned. Although I would prefer in the future if it wasn't raining throughout the whole visit whenever I go to a place. Anyways, waiting at the airport is not too much fun. But what else can you do when it's raining outside anyways? At least I was able to take a good look at the airport itself, which is perfectly fine. And that's all I can tell you about it. I guess, even though it probably doesn't make much sense, but if you're out there thinking about visiting Bucharest, I can definitely recommend it because it's full of interesting things. But I was only able to see maybe 10% of the interesting things. Oh well, I guess I do have to return at some point. And I guess this is the end. This is a relatively short video about it. Mostly because my memory is not that great and I should have made this video a long time ago. But now it's done and hopefully it's not too bad or disrespectful to any Romanian cities out there. And to end this whole story of me visiting Bucharest, I have to say that I'm always comfortable on planes because I hear all the horror stories of people taking up too much space next to you or sleeping on your shoulder or things like that, too loud, too noisy, too smelly, and I never really experienced that. Well, I never really experienced that up until the point I took the flight from Bucharest to Luton, because I did have someone sleeping on my shoulder, because, you know, they were tired. And that's it. So thanks for watching, and hopefully I was able to give you a sort of impression of what it is like to go to Bucharest when it's raining. So as always, have a safe travel and see you another time.